The Republic, the government of the Star Wars universe that failed so quickly and miserably. The downfall is mostly credited to Palpatine, and rightfully so, but the Republic had been deteriorating for a long time, and there were many factors that led to its speedy demise. Its government was a democracy, which is similar to many governments we see in the real world today. Palpatine deconstructed the government by manipulating its weaknesses and loopholes. But to make it clear, he was able to do this because the Republic itself was flawed, and it all came from the Senate. Its lawmaking process and decision-making on the galaxy came from its Galactic Senate. Its huge chamber consists of 1,024 repulsor pods. It's crazy to grasp the fact that each pod represents a planet. Each repulsor pod had about 3 to 4 people in it. One was usually an elected representative for the planet or some type of royalty, and the other people were usually advisors. That is how far we'll dive into the actual ethics of the day-to-day work and how the system of the Senate works, but if that's something you are interested in, I've covered that in a video before. So, in the Senate, there's a huge disconnect between the people and their representatives, aka the senators. The representatives were elected into being senator, but re-elections were a little different. It seems from just a lot of Star Wars media that once someone was chosen to be senator, they just kinda stayed as senator and never really left. And, well, it also seems like the senators didn't really have their people's interests in mind. This can be marked up for a few reasons, but the main one was that senators basically lived on Coruscant. Like, only Coruscant. And if they ever did go to their planet, they stayed in luxury mansions and had little to no idea what the average citizen required and how to represent those needs. The best case scenario was Naboo, for example. Naboo had Padme as the queen, but Palpatine as the senator. So Palpatine could advocate for Naboo on a much larger scale, and Padme could deal with the day-to-day needs of Naboo. Obviously, it didn't work that way because, Palpatine, but that system would be the best. The problem is many planets did not work this way, as usually the person who was the governor or, just rules the planet was also the senator. So because they weren't on their planet 90% of the time, they couldn't help their people, nor did it seem like they wanted to. This led to total anarchy and poverty, and people being upset with their leader. A good example is Onfree Ta, who represented the Ryloth people. He was heavily criticized by his people because the people of Ryloth were being bombed and under constant attack, and he was living a luxurious life on Coruscant. But more importantly, they hated him because he could help solve some of the conflict. But he didn't simply because he held a grudge with a strong military leader on Ryloth. Because Onfree Ta was not just a terrible senator because of his selfishness, because he was also involved in severe corruption, like most of the Senate. Now, corruption for the Republic happened in many ways, but like usual on this channel, I like to explore topics from a different, less talked about way. So to start, we are all aware that while corruption in the government existed before the Clone Wars, it really rose in the time of the Clone Wars to what you could say was its peak. But how did corruption rise in the Republic? Well, so usually there were huge crime bosses with huge militaries. And to be clear, I'm not really referring to the Hutts, even though technically they are crime bosses. They just kind of existed in plain sight, and the Republic usually left them alone because unless they worked with other crime syndicates, they usually had smaller, less important business dealings that the Republic didn't really care about. I'm talking about Crimson Dawn, Black Sun, and many others. These organizations could easily be paid to kill senators and leaders for other politicians' advantages. But the real question lies, how did they manage to do this? Of course, because of the Clone Wars, the Jedi and Republic spent less resources on crime syndicates and corruption and spent their time and money on fighting a war. The problem is these crime syndicates operated from the shadows, and no one knew where they were. Well, of course, if you dive into the lore, you can discover where they hid. So if, maybe, you skipped a lot of the Clone Wars episodes or just only watched the Clone Wars episodes that Disney Plus recommended, that you watch, then you may have missed out on the whole independent planet idea, or planets could choose to pick no side in the war. So that the idea was, throughout the war, the Republic would try to side with every planet it could, and so did the Separatists. Most deals were like the Republic gets to put a military base on a planet in exchange for protection against Separatist attacks. Now, the Separatists would come with the same exact deal, but vice versa, as the Separatists would often offer protection against the Republic, or at least they said they would. So what would really happen is, once the planet agreed with the Separatists, they would bring armies to the planet and turn the planet's town, like their main city, into their own military base. So they wouldn't have to put in the work to make their own separatist base. They would usually, to do this, imprison the leader or make him a puppet for the separatists. Then the people sometimes were forced to be workers or they were just killed. So most times the Republic was a better choice, but the separatists would go to a planet that maybe lived in poverty and required resources, and they would promise those resources, but then they would never give what they promised. So in Mandalore, Satine, who was Bo-Katan's sister and Obi-Wan's sort of love interest, chose not to pick sides. So she started this revolution, sort of, where all these planets came together at the idea that they wanted no side in the conflict. But rarely did a planet ever remain on no side. Usually most planets joined the Separatists, or the Separatists just invaded them and forced them to join their side. So what about the other planets that chose no side? Well, some of them joined the Republic, but that was very, very rare. And the small minority that stayed quote-unquote independent and chose no side, well, the reality is these worlds were run by crime syndicates, and people didn't really know. Other popular places for crime were Tatooine, Nal Hutta, and of course Coruscant, which could be considered the crime world because, let's be real, it is. So to sum up this whole crime corruption idea, the leaders of these crime syndicates could be persuaded to threaten and kill politicians in the Galactic Senate. If one senator wanted another senator dead, it could be done easily by hiring a bounty hunter. And no one would get in trouble, mostly because the Republic was starting to be an anarchy because of the war. So with all this unrest, the Republic was losing money and needed desperate funds. The Separatists were also losing money and needed desperate funds. And the citizens of the Republic were in severe poverty. Crime bosses were ruling, and constant war and death was happening. Then the Jedi were accused of being traitors and were hunted down. The Senate was scared. They were afraid that they were going to lose power, and it seemed the whole galaxy was crashing on them. There was chaos and destruction, and the senators were scared and they needed protection. But most importantly, they wanted order. They wanted to have strength. There were so many mysteries and hidden enemies that attacked each other and attacked the Republic for so long, and senators wanted it to just be us versus them, more clearly, more simple. They wanted to be so powerful with such strength that any people that opposed them would be crushed, whether it was crime syndicates or anybody. However, they couldn't have these things. Senators sat in the chamber. At the same time, the Jedi Temple was burning. Darth Maul was rising and controlling crime syndicates. The war had technically ended, but there was so much uncertainty and so much fear on what comes next. This is when Palpatine rose and offered a way out. He showed everyone the light. Palpatine presented a world of power, a world without uncertainty, a strong world, empire. And the senators, they gladly took it, as they believed they would be set free to easier, more safe lives. But as Obi-Wan said, he was deceived by a lie. We all were. The senators lost power and quickly became puppets. And they lost less and less control until the Senate was dismantled because there was no need for debates. As if the Empire did not like you or your opinions, they could blow up your planet. So the last remnants of the Republic died the day the Senate was cancelled and the Death Star was built. Thanks for watching this deep dive into why the Republic fell. I have a whole playlist of more of these on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you.